Hey guys, welcome to Alienation. I'm so excited, but so scared and nervous to finally be starting this little series that I've wanted to do on my channel for a while now. I did do a video on YouTube, so those of you who are just listening, there is a little video on my YouTube channel sort of explaining what this series is going to be. If you wanted sort of a behind the scenes info on it, you are more than welcome to go and view that video. But in a nutshell, each Sunday I want to be talking about some form of weird, crazy sort of topic. So it could be from serial killers and true crime to ghosts, supernaturals, conspiracy theories, anything like that really. And I actually thought I would kick it off today with a huge ass case. No pressure at all to me. There is so much detail in this case. It is still a wildly talked about case today. People still have different theories about this case. So like I said, this is my first video. Please be nice. I'm not professional, but I just wanted to give my 2 cents on this case. I just want to put my little disclaimer in here. This episode does contain topics and descriptions that some audiences or listeners may find disturbing, so viewer discretion is advised. So we are going to be talking about the White House Farm murders today. I recently watched a series on Netflix that was done. It stuck very well to the story, but it was kind of a fictionalized version of it, and I really enjoyed it and instantly got sucked into this case, and I knew I wanted to cover it. However, there is a lot of detail in this case. It gets very confusing, so bear with me on this one. So this case is actually back in 1985 in England, so it is in my own country. I do find British cases quite fascinating because it is close to home. So we're actually going to be going to a village called Tolshunt Darcy. I believe it is in Essex. I'm sorry if I pronounce anything wrong in this case. And this unfortunate case happened between the nights of the 6th and the 7th of August. This was at the home of Neville and June Bamber. Their home was known as White House Farm, and it was a beautiful farm. It still is today. It is still there, and there was so many acres, so much property, so much land that went into this farm. And inside the home at this time, so the 6th and the 7th of August, was June and Neville Bamber, their adopted daughter Sheila and her 2 sons. She had twin boys who were both 6 years old, and their names were Daniel and Nicholas Caffell, I believe it's pronounced. So I'm just going to do a little bit of background on the family before we actually get into that horrible night. So June and Neville Bamber were the parents of this family. They were the couple and they were the owners of this farm. So Ralph Neville Bamber, he actually went by his middle name Neville, was a farmer. He was a former RAF pilot, and he was also a local magistrate. He married his wife June in 1949 in a Christian church, and they moved into the farm. It's a lovely Georgian White House farm. It is absolutely gorgeous, and it had 300 acres of tenant farmland. All of this had belonged to June's father, so June inherited the farm. The couple were very religious. However, June was extremely religious. She was known to take her religion to the extreme. She was very, very serious about it. However, Neville was slightly more reserved, still very involved, took it very, very seriously, but was a little bit more reserved. And Neville was known as a friendly fellow, but everyone seemed to love him. He just seemed like a great guy. He was a big guy. He was 6 foot something, I think 6'4", I'm not too sure, but he was a tall, strong fellow, seemed to be happy, and they were well loved in the community. Sadly, they were unable to have their own children, and they were desperate to start their own family, so they actually chose to adopt. So they adopted 2 children, Sheila and Jeremy, when they were both babies. We have Sheila Jean. She was actually nicknamed Bambi later on in her life. She was adopted at just 3 months old, so she was only young. She was originally named Phyllis, but the Bambers actually renamed her Sheila. And unfortunately, after the adoption, June started to suffer massively with her mental health. She started to suffer from depression, and she actually got submitted to a psychiatric ward. While she was there, she was actually given electroshock therapy, which is a very intense, controversial style of treatment. It is very, very rarely done today. However, mental health back then, it wasn't as talked about as it is today. People were ashamed of it, things like that. So her doctor was actually Hugh Ferguson, so he was the one who would treat her. And unfortunately, later on in 1982, this same doctor would also treat Sheila, but we will get onto that later. So the family had this whole perfect image. They wanted to keep up appearances. Everyone seemed to love them, and they liked to keep everything behind closed doors. And they didn't want to ruin their whole image. image, I say in air quotations, that they had. So not many people knew about June's mental illness. So later on, So the garage next door is deciding to drill some form of something right while I'm filming. Excellent. So later on, the family also adopted Jeremy when he was only 6 months old. There was actually a 4-year age gap between Sheila and Jeremy, but they had the children that they wanted and life went on. So during her childhood, Sheila actually attended various schools. She went to some in Essex, some in Suffolk, Norfolk and even London. Jeremy was sent to St Nicholas's primary school, and then along with Sheila, he was also sent to Maldon Court Prep School. When he was 9, he was actually sent to a boarding school. Bear with me, I think it's Gresham's boarding school. This was in Hull in Norfolk, but unfortunately here he was bullied. He actually confided in some friends that he was adopted, and these friends, again, I say in air quotations, friends actually used this against him and bullied him for it. They mocked him, they teased him, they made his life a living hell. And unfortunately, while he was there was also some claims that he was even sexually assaulted while at this school. So going back to Sheila, I will be jumping back and forth. I'm trying to keep it chronological, but it's a little bit hard when there's so many characters in this story. So Sheila actually went on to Secretarial College in London, I believe. And in 1974, when she was just aged 17, she actually found out she was pregnant by her boyfriend Sheila Caffell. So, as you could probably expect, very religious parents, young daughter who's out of wedlock, as I believe it used to be called. She wasn't married, she was very young, finds out she's pregnant. It's not going to go down very well, is it? Did not set well at all with June and Neville, and they actually arranged for her to have an abortion. Something's not quite right if your very strict Catholic parents are telling you to get an abortion. Guys, I'm so sorry if you can hear this drilling that's going on. This doesn't happen often, but I'm just going to have to power through. So if you can hear that, I'm so sorry. So the Bambers actually chose their image over their faith this time, which was very shocking when you think about it. So they didn't want this to become sort of a scandal. So instead they kept it very hush, and they made Sheila give up the baby, which is devastating for a 17-year-old. So after this, obviously, Sheila's relationship with her mother began to deteriorate massively. And apparently one summer, June actually found the couple, so Sheila and Colin, sunbathing naked on the farm. Like, you do you, boo. Like, you want to sunbathe naked? Go for it. But obviously, to a strict Catholic religious family, it's not a very good thing to be doing in the middle of summer, in the middle of the day. And June obviously had her mental health issues. She actually started referring to Sheila as the devil's child. However, after her abortion, Sheila would actually carry on and finish her secretarial college training. Then she would actually go on to become a hairdresser. She did a bit of training in that. And she also worked as a fashion model for a short period, and she spent a couple of months in Tokyo with an agency. So jumping back to Jeremy. So we know he's had his troubles with school. However, Jeremy was actually a little shit, to put it bluntly. He was quite naughty at school. He'd always get into trouble. He would always wind other people up. So even though he was having difficulties, he wasn't the best student anyway. There's even reports that he was awful to his mum. Apparently she was terrified of rats, and he would go to the extreme of putting rats in his pocket and making his mum put his hand in there and not let her take it out. Things like that. He just wasn't a nice child. And as he got older, he actually dropped out of school with no qualifications, but then he actually went on to attend sixth form, which is kind of like a college. And in 1978, he actually achieved 7 O-levels, I believe, which is kind of equivalent to A-levels in the UK today. As Jeremy got older, he was still a little shit. Neville and June, unfortunately, they had a lot of money, so they tended to sort of spoil their children, and they actually paid for him to visit Australia and even New Zealand. So while he was in Australia, he did things like take a scuba diving course, just sort of live his best life. However, because Jeremy is Jeremy, he got into some trouble. I don't quite know officially what sort of things he got in trouble for, but he was known to be doing some illegal shit. Things like drug dealing was mentioned, smuggling drugs, theft. There was a huge bunch of different claims, I'm not sure, but either way, it is known that he got in trouble there. And guess what? His parents bailed him out. Can we start teaching our children right from wrong, please? So yeah, his parents bailed him out. he came home. His parents then actually offered him a job on the farm, and in my opinion, this is a pretty good deal. So the plan was for him to work on the farm. He would only get £170 a week, which does not sound like much at all, but if you think back then, money was kind of worth more, if that makes sense. And he was also given a cottage for free from his parents. So I believe the address is 9 Head Street, Goldhanger, and the cottage is between 3 and 3.5 miles from White House Farm. So it's just up the road, 5-minute drive, or you could probably bike it in about 15 minutes. So on top of that, so not only has Jeremy been shitty in another country, he's got in trouble, he's had to be bailed out. His parents then offer him a job, they offer him a house, then they give him a car. Oh, and on top of that, they also gave him 8% of part of the family company. It was actually OC Road campsite. They had a caravan site, they ran that, and Jeremy now had 8%. Interesting. Personally, not how I would parent children, but everyone's different. As time went on, June was really struggling with her mental health. She had very bad relationships with her children. Sheila just thought she disapproved of her, so didn't really have much to do with her. And Jeremy just didn't speak to her. And she started to see the world in black and white, no in between. There was good, there was bad. Her kids weren't good. And in this time, Jeremy would just be going out constantly, drinking, meeting loads of girls, just kind of being a normal male jackass. And turns out while he was working on the farm, he was even farming his own weed, which obviously his parents were not very happy about. He started to dress weird while working. He had eyeliner on. He sort of dressed in this whole like post-romanticism fashion while working on a farm. Each to their own. That's what he wanted to do. You do you, boo. And also at the same time, Sheila was just still not over her abortion. This is not something you take easy, especially if it was something that was forced upon you. However, later on, her and Colin did actually get married and she fell pregnant, which she must have been ecstatic about. However, when she was 6 months pregnant, she actually miscarried, which is just heartbreaking. You've already lost a child to your parents' decision. To then lose another one is it's just awful. And unfortunately, after that, she also suffered another miscarriage. So that is 3 babies that this poor lady had lost. But some happy news finally came. She finally fell pregnant and was actually pregnant with twins. So as time went on, unfortunately, Sheila and Colin's marriage fell apart. She found out he had a side hoe. Bit shitty that, Colin, I'm afraid. Bit shitty. So Neville actually comes to the rescue and buys Sheila a flat. So this flat is in Moorhead Mansions, Maida Vale. And Colin would help raise the children from his home too in Kilburn. Kilburn. One of those. However, during this time, Sheila's mental health also started to deteriorate and she started struggling as well. She was struggling with depression, she had mood swings, she just wasn't coping well at all. So she actually ended up being treated by the same doctor, so the doctor we mentioned earlier, so the same one who actually treated Mum June, his name was Hugh Ferguson. So she was treated in 1983. Unfortunately, she was actually admitted to a psychiatric hospital because she did decline that much, and she was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder. However, she apparently got better, she was responding well to her treatment, and she was actually discharged in September in 1983. And then Ferguson actually did say that he had misdiagnosed her, so she was re-diagnosed, and she was diagnosed with schizophrenia. However, it was a psychotic type of schizophrenia. So she began treatment, I can't pronounce this to save my life, trifluoperazine. Trifluoperazine. It was an antipsychotic drug either way. Sheila's illness actually started to kind of reflect her mum's illness, so she was kind of showing similar things to what June would do or say. So she would refer to her twins as the devil's children, and she also even stated that she didn't only want to kill herself, but she might also kill her children because she thought they were possessed. These twins are just like, what the fuck is going on? Anyway, she was cleared again, she was re-released, they said that she was no longer a threat to herself or society, and she was on the mend. But this time she was actually released with a treatment of injections. I can't remember what the drug was or what sort of injection it was, I just know it was an injection, and this injection she received actually had sedative side effects. So she was drowsy, she was sort of sleepy all the time because it kind of kept her in this weird sort of state where she wasn't a danger to herself or anyone else. And because of her mental health, she didn't really have much time with her kids. She didn't see her sons much. She was very restricted to how often she could see them, and I believe her visits were always when she was with other people, so it wasn't always just herself and her sons, so they mostly lived with their dad Colin. However, on August the 4th, 1985, Sheila actually took the boys to visit her parents. So they headed down to the farm to stay there for a few days and just let the kids see their grandparents. And obviously Sheila's relationship with her mum wasn't very good, so there was a little bit of tension, but everyone was being civil and they all just were looking forward to a nice few days together. So a couple of days go by and we are at the date of the 6th of August. So the housekeeper had mentioned that she'd actually seen Sheila that day and noticed that there was nothing unusual. Everyone just sort of seemed okay. There was nothing concerning happening. And two farm workers say that they also saw her with the children and everyone sort of seemed happy. There was no tension or anything. But on this night, everyone was round for a family dinner. So that includes Jeremy, the son, Sheila, her two sons, and June and Neville. And apparently during this dinner, it was actually suggested to Sheila from her parents that the boys would be put into foster care. However, this is a little bit blurry around these things because apparently it was daytime foster care, which in my opinion is just childcare, which kind of makes no sense. So if you say that you are putting someone in foster care, that's kind of taking someone's children away from them. But if it's daytime foster care, in my opinion, that's like daycare. That's just extra help. And the psychiatrist did actually mention that Sheila had mentioned that she would be happy to accept help, happy to accept someone help her with the boys so she could spend more time with them. According to Jeremy, this suggestion did not go down well at all and Sheila was very, very upset. So we don't actually know if it was actual foster care or daycare. Take what you want from that. So the night goes on and a farm worker actually claims that he watched Jeremy leave at about 9:30. And then for some reason, there are some phone calls that go down that night, which I'm sorry, but if it's 9:30 and you are phoning me, I'm tired. Let me sleep. Don't be phoning my house. But anyway, so Barbara Wilson, she was the farm secretary. She actually phoned Neville and they had a little conversation on the phone. I don't know why she was calling. Apparently they had a good relationship, but we don't know. But she claims that she thinks that she may have interrupted an argument and that Neville seemed pretty short with her and a little bit blunt, and he even hung up the phone and he'd seemed irritated, but he'd never done that before. He'd never acted that way, so that was a little bit suspicious. However, later on, June's sister, Pamela Boutflower, some interesting names in this one, apparently she phoned around 10 p.m. Why are you all calling each other that late? And she said she even spoke to Sheila and she said she seemed a little bit quiet, but then again, she was drugged up. She's gonna be. And she spoke to June, who seemed normal, so nothing really seemed suspicious apart from Neville's little phone call. However, later that night, Jeremy actually phones the police around 3:30 a.m, which is now the 7th of August. So during the phone call, he claimed that his dad, Neville, had telephoned him to say that his sister had gone berserk with a gun. And then apparently the call just ended as if someone had just cut the line.
My father's phoned from White House Farm and he sounded really frightened. He says, my sister's gone crazy and she's got a gun.
This was a telephone call to the local police station. He didn't phone 999, he phoned the actual station, which required him to get out a phone book or Yellow Pages or whatever it was back then, locate the number. Bearing in mind, it does state on this little ad that if it is an emergency, to call 999. However, he chose to call the local police station. So the police officer, they actually said, we will meet you there. If you could head down there, we'll send out some officers and they'll meet you there. So during this time, as the police officers that were actually sent out as dispatch, they actually sort of caught up with Jeremy. Bearing in mind, he lived not far at all. They actually passed him on the road and he was apparently driving extremely slow, like crawling down this lane. Which, I'm sorry, but if your family are potentially in a bit of a bad situation, you would not be crawling your ass down that road, would you? But anyway. And apparently Jeremy is usually a very fast driver, which doesn't surprise me. He gives off that whole I don't follow the rules of the road, indicators aren't a thing, I'll speed if I want kind of vibe. So Either way, this was quite unusual for Jeremy, but you don't know how you're going to react in those situations. He was driving slow regardless. So the police and Jeremy were actually waiting outside the house. There was no attempts to go into the house. They didn't really inspect it because they were under the impression that Sheila was in there with a gun. There could be hostages, there could be people already dead, we don't know. So instead, they chose to actually try and communicate with her using a megaphone. Which is a little bit bizarre. I'm sorry, but if there is apparently a psycho in there with a gun, the last thing you want to be doing is shouting at them from outside with a megaphone. But again, each to their own. So they actually did this for pretty much 2 hours while they waited for backup. And during this time, there was no signs of movement coming from the house. There were claims that apparently someone saw someone wandering around, but I'm pretty sure that was debunked and it was just a shadow or something. The only thing that was coming from the house was the noise of a dog barking. So as I was researching this, I just want to state there were a huge amount of people who had covered this case who were a little bit confused as to this part of the case, basically. So a lot of people were questioning why the police weren't armed, why no one had guns, and why Jeremy didn't just go home, grab his own gun and storm in there himself. A lot of people were just curious to why there was a lack of guns in this situation, apart from obviously the one Sheila apparently had. So we have this thing in the UK called strict gun laws. Not many people here have guns. If you were to get a percentage of the amount of people in the UK who have them, it's not that high. I'm aware you need some form of licensing, you may need some form of training to hold a gun. It's just not a big thing over here. And obviously, if we were to start handing out guns to everyone and anyone, every police officer out there, people get a little bit trigger happy, innocent people get shot. It's just not really as much of a thing here. I can't just go to my local shop and be like, hi, yes, 1 gun, please. Thank you. So whether or not certain police officers in nowadays are, I don't know, packing fire, I don't know. But they do have other forms of protection, so like batons, pepper spray, tasers, I don't really know. But I just know back then and kind of now, not everyone has a gun. And obviously if Jeremy was to start going and waving his own gun around, he could probably have got done as well. Like, there's rules against that, I'm afraid. I'm not saying that this situation should have been handled differently. It should have been 100%. There was a bit of shitty police work in this, and when I say a bit, I mean a lot. And it should have been handled differently. As soon as they knew there was a situation with a gun, backup should have been called instantly. Yes, I do believe that. However, it's a little bit different here in the UK. Those 2 initial police officers wouldn't have been armed. God, that was a bit of a tangent, wasn't it? So anyway, they're waiting for backup. There's all sorts of like little commotions going on. And during this time, apparently it was noted that Bamber, when I say Bamber, I mean Jeremy, seemed very calm for someone who has an entire family that could potentially be dead or in a house in trouble. And during this time, he just casually was chatting away to the officers about this, that and the other. He actually mentioned that he didn't get along with his sister. And when he was asked if he believed that she would have gone berserk with a gun, he apparently replied saying, I don't really know, she is a nutter, but she's been having treatment. And then the police asked him, like, why would Neville have called you, saying that his sister had gone crazy with a gun? And why wouldn't he have called the police? Why wouldn't he have phoned 999? And Jeremy just said that Neville liked to keep things secret in the family. He wouldn't really want people knowing that this sort of thing was going down. Jeremy also stated that he chose not to call 999 himself because he thought that if he called the local station, they'd respond quicker. Okay. He also was chatting away about cars to some of the officers, saying that soon he would have his own Porsche. Loads of random things like that. I'm sorry, again, if that was me, I'd be freaking the fuck out. I'd like, we need to get this sorted. I'm scared for my family. But no, he's casually just going, yeah, I'm going to have a Porsche soon. It's going to be great. So while he's shying away, he also happened to mention that Sheila was very familiar with guns. They'd been target shooting as kids and while they grew up. But then he did mention that while he was at the farmhouse earlier, he thought he saw some rabbits and actually got a rifle out. He'd loaded it and then decided not to, or the rabbits had run off, I'm not sure. And he actually mentioned that he had left the rifle, so left a loaded gun, on the table. I'm sorry, but there are kids in this house. I know kids, well, I'd like to think they would know not to start shooting each other and playing with guns, but at the same time, there are kids in this house. Your mentally ill sister is in this house, yet you're going to leave a fucking loaded rifle on a table. It's a bit strange that, Jeremy, isn't it? Apparently it happens, you forget and you leave loaded guns on a table. So finally, when backup came and they finally chose to go into the house, it shouldn't have taken this long, but it did. It took ages. They finally decide they need to go into the house. This was at 7:54 a.m. and as they are approaching the door, they do state that there seems to be a female body in the kitchen. However, once they broke in, got through the door, went into the kitchen, they realised that this unfortunately was the body of Neville Bamber. He must have just been in a strange position, but either way, he was slumped over a chair. He was wearing his pyjamas and it had appeared that he'd been shot. However, the kitchen was a mess. There was upturned furniture, there was spilt things like sugar, there was just stuff everywhere. And it turns out Neville was actually shot 8 times. You know, apparently once isn't enough. 8 has got to do. 6 of those shots were in his face, in his head area, his facial area, his neck, this top sort of area. Like, he was done in pretty bad. Actually, when inspecting the area, they actually believed that he was shot first of all upstairs due to the amount of shell casings that they found. They believe he was shot 4 times upstairs and he somehow managed to get downstairs. Like, this is one badass dude. He's already been shot 4 times and he's still putting up a fight. He's still running around the house. And while he got downstairs, apparently this was where a struggle took place. He was hit several times and it seems to have been the butt of the rifle that he was hit with, so sort of the bottom of it. He was kind of battered and he was shot again, but this time it was fatal. Wow, he put up a fight, like. So anyway, they found June, Sheila and the 2 boys upstairs, and unfortunately all of them were dead. All of them died of gunshot wounds and it was just a bit of a bloody mess. So the boys were actually found in their own bed. Daniel had been shot 5 times in the head. 5 times. Like, Jesus. Nicholas had been shot 3 times. I don't know why there was a difference between how many bullets was used between each child, but yeah, that's just how they were found. Then they found June and Sheila were actually found in the same room. So June's body and her clothes were just heavily bloodstained. She was not in a good shape at all. She was wearing her nightdress, she had bare feet, so pretty much just ready for bed, maybe even was in bed, because the police actually believed that she was actually sat up for part of her shooting, which it would make sense if she was just chilling in bed reading a book or something. We don't know. Yeah, due to the patterns of the blood, they thought she was sat up for part of her unfortunate attack. But she was actually found lying on the floor, so she had initially been shot and then had somehow managed to crawl onto the floor, and she was found by the door in that master bedroom. So she had been shot 7 times. There is so much ammunition going into this, it is insane. And one of the shots was actually to the forehead in the centre of her eye, so just straight out, see you later. And then in the same room, they also found the body of Sheila.
I'm about to show some intense and explicit photos from the crime scene, so some of you may want to skip ahead to 29 minutes 5 seconds.
She too was in her nightdress, she had bare feet, so again, as if she was ready for bed. However, Sheila only had 2 bullets in her compared to the rest of the family. That's not that many. She actually had 1 under her chin and 1 in her neck. They were quite close, these bullet wounds, but at the same time they were separate. So pathologist, I think it's Peter Venezis, again, sorry for the pronunciation, he said that the actual lower wound, so the one in her neck, it would eventually have killed her, but it wouldn't have killed her instantly. She would have sort of survived this initial shot. So she was actually shot 3 inches away, so that entrance wound where the gun was 3 inches away, if that makes any sense. However, the higher one, so the higher one that was under her chin, this was actually a contact injury, so the gun was pressed against her skin, and that higher one would have killed her immediately. So altogether, there had been 25 shots that were fired, and all of them were mostly at close range. So just going back to Sheila's injuries, the pathologist also testified that she could have possibly have survived, and even with a gunshot to the neck, she apparently could have stood up and walked around, which, I'm sorry, but if I was shot in the neck, I'm not going anywhere. I am lying my ass down and I am dying. I am not standing up and taking an evening stroll around my house. But anyway, apparently it is possible. However, there was a severe lack of blood on her nightdress, so he stated it was not possible. If she's been shot in the neck, she's going to be bleeding. If she was to get up at any point, there would be a lot more signs of this. There would be blood everywhere. Looking at the crime scene, they actually found the murder weapon. It wasn't hidden, it was in plain sight. It was actually found lay across Sheila's body, and I believe it was a semi-automatic .22 rifle? I don't know guns, but apparently that's what it was. If that means anything to you, there you go. And it was found lay across Sheila's body, pointing towards her head, obviously as if she'd committed suicide. But this rifle actually only holds 10 rounds or 10 bullets, I don't really know, and 25 shots were fired. So this gun during this night actually had to have been reloaded twice to be able to have fired all of those bullets. So just want to make a point, this gun normally has a silencer on the end. A silencer is kind of self-explanatory. It doesn't quite 100% silence the noise of the gunshots, but it just reduces it. It stops it from being as loud. And apparently this silencer was a little bit of a pain to be removed. It's not the easiest of tasks. I think you have to use a screwdriver to take it off, so it's usually just left on. And also every single time that you reload this gun, apparently it gets more and more difficult to the point where it can be pretty damn hard to reload this gun. However, the silencer wasn't found on the gun. So silencer is missing, it is just a gun. So instantly the police see this crime scene and they're like, this is an open shut case, it's a murder-suicide. We've heard from the brother, she has mental health issues, she's clearly gone crazy and she's killed her entire family and then committed suicide. It just looked very black and white, it looked exactly as it was, and this is what it was deemed. It was deemed a murder-suicide. Also, there was no signs of forced entry, so no one could have got in. Everything was closed from the inside, so it had to have happened inside the house. No one else could have done it and got out without breaking a door or anything like that. So obviously the police officers had to inform Jeremy that his entire family had been massacred, had been murdered and brutally as well, and that he pretty much had no one left. And obviously upon hearing this, Jeremy reacts so badly. I mean, I wouldn't even comprehend how I would react if someone told me my entire family was gone. I would probably just die there and then and just be, I was like, I'm out too, see ya. So he was absolutely hysterical. He was screaming, he was crying, and he was just kicking off. He started kicking stuff, he was screaming, he was going crazy. And apparently Detective Sergeant Stan Jones reported that he even saw Jeremy trying to make himself sick. So there was a doctor that was actually called to the house that night, well, say morning at this point. He testifies that the deaths could have occurred at any point in the night, and he also mentioned that Bamber just appeared to be in a state of shock. Again, you would be. So going back to the crime scene, there was blood everywhere. It was just a mess. It just wasn't looking great. However, Sheila's body was weirdly, it looks kind of untouched. Obviously she had been shot, but there was no signs that she'd been through any form of struggle. She was this perfectly petite model. Just to mention, she had a perfect manicure. She'd recently had her nails done and they were still in a perfect condition. So it was deemed a murder-suicide, right? But let's just think about it for a second. Sheila, unfortunately, well, I say unfortunately, if it was helping her, fortunately, but either way, Sheila was heavily medicated. She was on the injections and the drugs that we mentioned that made her extremely drowsy. They had sedative effects. Physically, she was a petite model. If you think about modelling back in the day, the majority of models had to be very slender, very slim. They're not going to be the strongest of girls. However, it was deemed a murder-suicide. Sheila had somehow got the gun, shot her father, then had a struggle with him downstairs where she brutally attacked him in the process of ripping the kitchen up, and then went upstairs, killed her own sons, killed her mother, and eventually killed herself, shot herself once, and then was like, oh, I missed, let's do it again. And obviously during this time, she was reloading the gun in between shots, and very cleverly didn't get any blood on her. She had no bruises, so even if Neville fought back, she managed to stay in perfect shape, and her nails were immaculate. She must be talented to be able to reload a very difficult gun to reload twice and not even chip a single nail. Talented gal, if you ask me. So while Jeremy was sort of losing his shit, they actually brought Julie Mugford down. Julie Mugford is a key person in this case, and she is actually Jeremy's girlfriend. And the police actually decided to give them some alone time. I mean, he's just lost his entire family. Like, let him have a cuddle, let him be reassured for a minute. However, it is reported that people heard the couple giggling and whispering and acting very, very questionable. Again, bit weird. Your family's just been murdered? What the fuck? Like, in 1985, unfortunately, forensics just was nowhere near as developed as it is today, and a bunch of evidence was unaccounted for. So obviously the police had to sort of storm in this house, and they trampled over so much potential evidence. It was just ransacked. There was so many people just wandering in and out of the home. Nothing was preserved. Just nothing was cornered off or taped off. So everything was pretty much wrecked from the get-go. And like I said, forensics wasn't really a big thing like back then, but at the same time, certain things could have been saved. So again, Kind of shitty police work. It was very careless, but they just presumed it was a murder-suicide. They didn't think they had to check any more options. The house was searched a little bit, but it probably wasn't done thoroughly because they thought they had the answer to this case already. So the gun was actually removed, and it was removed without gloves. They just picked it up with their own greasy ass hands and was like, see you later. It wasn't tested for fingerprints. Apparently it was eventually, but weeks later. So everyone's fingerprints would have been on this gun at this point. So 3 days after the murder, all the family were given keys back and they were allowed access back to the house. The police actually didn't want to sort of burden the family, and they wanted to spare the family's feelings and everything. So they actually burnt evidence. So they took bedding, they took carpet, they ripped it all out, and they set it all on fire, and they watched it all go up in smoke like, see you later, evidence. Have fun. Like, oh shit. But they thought they had the answer. So they pretty much just cleaned it all up and was like, you're good to go. It was not a very good idea, is it? The media went to town on Sheila. She was called a huge bunch of names. Like, the tabloids are assholes anyway. The stories they print are always disgusting, but they called her a druggie, they called her a psycho. As soon as the news spread, it was just everywhere, and the headlines were horrible. I know I'm trying to do this chronologically, but I just want to say as well, 10 years after the crime happened, any blood evidence that they did have, so any form of proof or what little they did take, was actually destroyed. Again, not a very good idea. But anyway, they did actually investigate a little bit further. They have certain procedures that they had to follow. So they did an autopsy on Sheila, and they actually found that she was on her medication. She was drowsy. She wasn't going to be strong. She was going to be a bit weaker and a bit tired. I don't really know how to explain it. I shouldn't really laugh. This is not a funny case. I shouldn't be laughing. And they also found that she could have potentially have been smoking cannabis a few days prior to this, which instantly people were like, oh, it's terrible, it's going to affect her, she's going to go crazy. Actually, cannabis has the opposite effect. So when mixed with this drug that she was taking for her mental illness, it would actually increase the effects of this antipsychotic drug, so it would make her even more drowsier, even more sleepy. Like, she's not going to want to kill her entire family. She's probably going to want to take a nap. So at this point, the cousins, the family, they all had keys and they all had access to the house. And they started doing what any family would do eventually, would be to sort of tackle the house, start going through everything. If they've got any family heirlooms they want to keep, you know, just sort of preserve the life, protect the life. Like, if you've ever lost someone, obviously this is something that does have to be sorted eventually. They were packing up, doing whatever they could, and strangely enough, one of the cousins finds the silencer in a cupboard. It's like, where have you been? Explain. So this was a silencer that was usually on the exact gun and the murder weapon, and they stated that it appeared to have red flecks on it, and it was actually sticky to touch, which kind of makes me feel a bit gross. And instead of instantly calling the police, they actually chose to take it to one of the other cousins' houses for safekeeping. Again, fingerprints everywhere. It has been transported here, there and everywhere. It's not going to be a solid piece of evidence that they can test. However, they did phone the police eventually, and it took the police 3 days to come and collect this. So it had red flecks on it, it was sticky to the touch, and also there was a hair apparently on this. But because it was passed around here, there and everywhere, and it took 3 days for the police to finally come and get it, it was contaminated, and that hair was actually nowhere to be found. But anyway, when they did actually test it and look into it, they found blood on the silencer. So the red flecks or flakes, whatever they found, wasn't actually the blood. That was apparently paint that matched certain parts of the crime scene, but there was blood also found on the silencer. So the family just didn't believe Sheila could do this. They thought that from the get-go. They thought she wasn't capable, that she wouldn't do anything like this. And after they found this silencer, they were even more adamant that Sheila couldn't have done this, that she wouldn't have done this. And they began to suspect that there was something else going on, that something else happened there. And funnily enough, Jeremy starts acting very, very shitty. I understand everyone deals with things differently. However, when you lose your entire family, there are certain behavioural traits that are going to become questionable if you start doing them.
He started to show sort of elements of not really grieving, and there was a point where he came running up the stairs with his hair all soaped up and pulled in spikes. He'd just been in the bathroom, and he was copying the photograph of Daniel and Nicholas, and he came running up the stairs giggling and ran straight into my mother and then went started putting on the whole performance. But it was really after the funeral, we were in the car going to the crematorium, and he started larking around with Julie in the front of the car, saying what he'd like to be doing to her later in the afternoon.
He would just be saying bizarre things, acting very strangely around tabloids or the press or whatever, or cameras or the public. He'd put on this very distraught act where he was heartbroken, but then instantly would turn around to his family. When the public and everyone could see him, he'd just be sound. He'd have a smile back on his face, he wouldn't care. He'd be like, yeah, I'm fine. So he was just acting all kinds of weird. So when it came to the day of the funeral, at least 2 attendees of the funeral did mention that Jeremy came down in a very expensive Hugo Boss suit. And apparently he opened up his jacket to show the guests and said that he was wearing Boss, said that he was now the boss, and that's what I am from now. He's already taken on the title. Hold on, mate, your family are not even cold, and you're already saying I'm the boss now. Bit weird. However, it came to the day of the funeral, and apparently Jeremy was inconsolable. There is a lot of footage of this. He's crying, he's just sobbing, he's in hysterics.
As he followed the coffins, he seemed inconsolable, leaning heavily on his girlfriend's arm for support.
And apparently he couldn't even stand up at certain points, and his girlfriend Julie had to hold him up. However, multiple people testify that there was not a single tear shed. His cheeks were dry. It was all just acting and exaggeration. Like, he wasn't even crying. He didn't cry once. The second he was out of the public eye, like he was in the car to leave the funeral, he'd have a smile on his face and he'd be making jokes and laughing. So at the wake, obviously, when you're at the wake, you talk about a whole bunch of things, but at the same time, you are at a wake. It is not a fun, joyous occasion. Even if you want to celebrate their life, there's still sadness in the air, it's still heartbreaking, but there is different chatter going on. However, Jeremy just appeared like he didn't give a shit. He was joking around, saying that he's the boss now. He was flirting with a bunch of women. Bearing in mind his girlfriend is there, like, have a little bit of respect, mate. And he was actually talking and bragging about all the inheritance he was going to receive. Your family has just been murdered. And unfortunately, after the funeral, his behaviour got worse. He started selling off all of his family's possessions, and he did stoop to some pretty disgusting lows that I will talk about in a minute. So as time went on, Jeremy's relationship with Julie actually began to deteriorate. They were fighting. Jeremy was just a bit of an asshole. He was maybe cheating on her, he was flirting with a whole bunch of women. Like, it's not a very good idea. And their relationship did become extremely toxic. Julie even states that she at one point held a pillow over his head and tried to suffocate him, because that's how done she was with his shit. So on September the 7th, 1985, Julie actually headed down to the police station. She was like, I'm a woman scorn and I'm gonna bring your ass down. She actually decides to give a second statement. So this was after she had broken up with Jeremy. They both were no longer together. She basically said that her first statement was completely wrong. She first mentions that her and Jeremy had done a few shady things in the past, including she helped him stage a robbery against the family's caravan site. She claims that they actually stole $1,000 from the office. Okay, he's stealing money from his own family, but whatever. And then she went on to say that earlier on, so a few months prior, he kept saying that he wanted to get rid of all of his family.
He had this intention of poisoning them and burning down the house, and I just disregarded what he was saying, really, because he used to say things to shock people.
And that he was completely sick of them ruining his life. He'd also said to Julie on multiple occasions that his sister has nothing to live for, and that the twins were disturbed. And he was just annoyed that his parents were paying for Sheila's life, paying for her flat, because all of that was coming out of his inheritance. And then she went on to say he had even planned to commit these murders. So he'd always talked about sedating them, like different types of different ways to kill his entire family, which is it's just sick. He even said he could set the whole house on fire with them all in it, and that he'd even planned and stated he could shoot them all. And he could blame it on Sheila because she was an easy scapegoat. It would make more sense for her to do it. But obviously this was just Julie's word. We have no solid proof. Then she said that he'd also come up with sort of a second plan, like how he would do it, and this potentially was the way it was done. He would cycle to the farmhouse in the middle of the night and he would use only the back road, so there'd be no one to see him. He wouldn't risk exposure to anyone, and that he could enter the property using a specific window. I thought it was the kitchen, but I've heard bathroom. Either way, it was a downstairs window that had a broken latch. So apparently all the kids used to sneak out when they were younger, and they used to use this specific window because apparently you could access it from the outside to get in, and then as you would leave you'd sort of wiggle it or something, and then it'd fall back down so it looked like it was locked from the inside. He also then apparently said that he would somehow make a fake phone call to himself that night and it would throw off the investigators. So it seemed like he'd kind of planned it out pretty well. So anyway, Julie claims that at 9:50 p.m, so this was apparently around the time that he had left and had arrived home, so he'd left the farm from the meal he was having and he was back home, they'd called Julie and he'd said it was tonight or never. Bit weird, that Jeremy. But anyway, between 3 and half 3, he phoned her again and said everything is going well, but something is wrong at the farm. However, the flatmates do testify and do confirm that this was actually closer to the 3 a.m. mark. And later that morning, after Julie had been to sleep, he phoned her again, just said Sheila had gone mad with a gun, and the police were coming to get her in a police car. And that is when she actually confirmed that when they had that little time together and he pulled her aside when they were giggling, he apparently said to her, I should have been an actor. No, Jeremy, you should have just been a better person. That kind of confirms what other police have said when they've heard them whispering. She then goes on to say that later that day she did actually ask Jeremy, did you do it? Like, I want to know. And apparently he said no, but that he'd hired someone else to do it. He said it was actually a friend of his, and this person was a plumber that the family had hired in the past. And he actually went on to talk about all the things that he said that he'd said to the plumber to do. Like, this is how you get into the house. I want you to kill this person this way, this blah, 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 blah. He then said that he had paid this person £2,000 to kill his entire family. It's not that much. Jeremy was actually arrested the following day. Obviously, he was taken in for questioning, and Jeremy, being Jeremy, obviously denied it. He didn't want to go down for 5 people's murders. So during his questioning, Jeremy apparently always had really snarky comments and answers to everything. He just seems like an absolute arsehole. I'm sorry for putting my opinion out there. He was being snarky, kind of thinking he's untouchable right now. He's got all this money, doesn't really matter, you can't pin this on me. However, the guy that he had actually tried to pin it on or say he had hired, apparently to Julie, had an airtight alibi. He couldn't have done it. So once again, they're like, Jeremy, mate, you need to start answering some questions and explain what happened truthfully. So he actually did confess to the break-in at this point. So the thing Julie accused him of was stealing the money from the caravan, and he actually confessed to this but said he had a very good reason for it. He claimed that he wanted to prove to Neville, his own father, that they needed a better security system. Like, you could have just told him, like, sat down and told him, we didn't have to stage a robbery. He was actually released on bail on September the 13th. I mean, he's rich now, he's inherited all his money, he can pay his own bail. And then while he was out on bail, he carried on doing a lot of shitty stuff, acting very strangely. And he obviously had to go through, like the rest of his family, go through possessions and things like that. He had been selling on things. And at this point, from Sheila's home, he actually found some nude photographs that Sheila had done. Apparently, Sheila was very embarrassed of this shoot that she did. It wasn't what she imagined it to be. But anyway, Jeremy got hold of these pictures. They're naked, nude, raunchy photos of your sister. Like, if you found that, you'd instantly be like, whoa, close that up, don't want to see that, let's just get rid of this, destroy this for her. Instead, good old Jeremy decides to go to the newspapers. He actually chose to go to the Sun newspaper. We don't stand the Sun here, the Sun is a piece of shit. He actually tried to sell these topless nude photos of his sister to the Sun. I'm very shocked the Sun didn't take him because the Sun's a piece of garbage, but anyway, they actually declined. They were like, we don't want anything to do with this. And instead, they ran a story of this bizarre approach of Jeremy trying to sell nude photos of his sister. It came out that he tried to do this, and yeah, it wasn't looking very good. He decides to take a vacation, which can be understandable sometimes, especially if you've got the money. You want to break away from everything. So he actually travels to Saint-Tropez, and this is in the south of France with his friend. His friend stuck by him, thought he was completely innocent, like helped him with a lawyer and things like that. Apparently they were having a ball. Jeremy started saying some weird stuff, kind of like he does, running his mouth, talking about inheritance, and his best friend actually began to suspect something wasn't quite right. So while Jeremy was just sort of living his best life in a different country, the police were sort of digging around and looking for a bit more evidence. The family kept persisting and pushing that something wasn't quite right here, and some of the detective sergeants or other police people on the force were pushing for it too. And they actually believed that they found enough evidence to arrest Jeremy. So while his boat docked back in the UK, they were ready and they arrested him. So he was put on trial, and his trial was in October 1986, and his trial lasted 19 days. The main sort of thing they needed was Julie. They needed Julie to testify, but apparently she was a bit, oh, I don't really know, do I do it, do I not? So they basically said, we will grant you immunity of all the charges that we have against you. They'd all be dropped if you testify. She got off so well in this case. First of all, she lied to police, she was holding evidence, apparently she was getting done for fraud. There was a whole bunch of things against her, and they were just like, Julie, just stand up there, tell us your little story, and you'll be good to go. Okay, thank you, bye. She actually agreed to testify. And there was a whole bunch of evidence. I say that loosely because there is no 100% solid evidence, because like I said, it just wasn't as great back then, police work and things like that, forensics wasn't as great, but anyway, there was enough evidence that they'd found that they thought they could put him away for this. So apparently a small blade of some sort was found near the window, which was used to sort of unlatch this specific window. Apparently this was found, again, I couldn't find solid evidence of this. This was how he gained access into the house, and then around the window they believed he gained access, there was scuff marks, and just, it was present that there was stuff there that someone had like got in. Does that make sense? So like scuff marks on the paint, like shoe marks, little things like that. So it looked like someone had actually entered the property, and obviously this completely throws out the idea that it was in-house, that no one else could have got in and got out without leaving some form of evidence or broken door. And then going back to Sheila. Sheila was found in immaculate condition, yet apparently she had somehow brutally attacked her father with a gun. Bearing in mind, Jeremy claimed that Sheila had knowledge of guns. However, speaking to the family, Sheila had no knowledge of guns. She'd never used one, she hadn't shot one, she didn't know what she was doing. Yet somehow she had apparently reloaded this gun twice, yet managed to keep her body in immaculate condition. And then it turns out, if Sheila had committed suicide, apparently she was somehow laid down with the gun up to her neck. First of all, she shot herself and apparently missed. It turns out that Sheila wasn't actually big enough to do that. Like, her arms weren't long enough to be able to lie down with the gun placed against her chin and shoot herself. So it would have made sense if the silencer wasn't on the gun. She would have been able to reach. However, if you take the silencer off the gun, that means somehow Sheila was shooting the hell out of her father, and the twin boys didn't wake up, the mum didn't move or seem alarmed or anything. Guns are loud, someone would have heard that. And apparently the red flecks that were found on the gun were actually red paint from something in the kitchen, and there were scuff marks from where that paint had come from, so it would make sense that the silencer was present during the attack. So it was kind of led to believe that the silencer was on for all of the murders. However, when it came to framing Sheila, the person who did it removed the silencer because they realised her arms weren't long enough to hold the gun and shoot herself and commit suicide if the silencer was on the end. Another part of evidence that they tried to state was that Neville had been shot in the face multiple times. He had damage to his mouth, your larynx, multiple things. He would not have been able to talk. So somehow he's been shot in the face. He somehow then managed to phone Jeremy and perfectly speak to him, and obviously Jeremy just denied it all. So the jury actually found Jeremy guilty of all 5 counts of murder, and it was a majority of 10-2. Usually votes like this have to be pretty unanimous from what I'm aware. Strangely, the judge decided to take a majority vote, and he was actually done for it. And he basically turned around and told Jeremy that he was an evil piece of shit, that he was the worst kind of human possible, and he was sentenced to 5 life sentences. It was recommended that he serve at least 25 years in prison. And after this, Julie, who had just been sort of brushed off, was like, off you go, hun, thank you, you've done your part. She actually went on to sell her story for a shit ton of cash. Some say 25,000, some say up to 60,000. It was a lot of money. But anyway, Jeremy went to jail, he went to prison, and while he was there, he has actually tried appealing his case multiple times. He has been rejected. He's tried petitioning, but nothing's ever really been confirmed because the evidence that has apparently been brought forward, there's no sort of solid proof. It's a little bit sketchy, but either way, Jeremy is still in prison. He's been there since, and that is pretty much where we're at today. He still maintains his innocence, so that is actually the end of this case, the end of my first video. Thank you for bearing with me. It was very long, very confusing. You'll have to let me know what you think. I do think he did it. I personally do think he did it. He had a lot to gain from this. Just comment below, do you think he did it? However, please just keep the comment section a safe place, respect other people's opinions, keep it friendly. Also, if you have any suggestions on what you want me to cover, obviously this is my first ever episode. There is hopefully lots more to come. You'll have to let me know, whether it be a true crime case you want me to cover or anything. Yeah, thank you so much for watching or listening, depending on which one you're doing. It means a lot to me, it really does. So if you are watching, please give it a massive thumbs up, leave me a comment down below and subscribe. However, if you are listening, like, review, rate, whatever else you can over on all of the sort of streaming services, that would be great as well. I hope you liked it. Stay safe, don't do anything crazy, don't kill your entire family, and be a good person. Bye!